Welcome to Coffee with Joe for January 20th, 2011. It's a little late for coffee, Joe.
Yeah, it is.
Apologies to our viewers for being away for a couple of weeks. There have been some technical difficulties. Joe has a new laptop, and we're up and running again. And we're talking about the NEED Act, which we've been talking about in the last few installments. This is the National Employment Emergency Defense Act, H6550, that was submitted by Dennis Kucinich in the lame duck Congress and didn't get any attention at that point, but will be resubmitted in the new Congress. And this is a debt-free money act. This is a reform of the full monetary system and what we've been talking about. And today we want to talk about a little bit of the math of how much money are we talking about would be created. We talked a little bit about the Monetary Authority, which would be the 9-member group appointed by Congress, but to be independent of Congress, that would determine the amount of money that would be created in a given year by the government. And we're going to lead you through a little bit of math on how we think that might look. And then we want to talk a little bit about the effect that it would have on the states, because Section 504 of the Act talks about each year the Monetary Authority shall instruct the Secretary to disperse grants over a 12-month period to the states equal to 25% of the money created under this title in 1 year. Let's see how much of a grant would that be to the states. We're going to start with the GDP of the United States, and we're going to call it $14.1 trillion of GDP. If you're anticipating that the economy would be growing 3% next year, and you assume that the economy in that case will need 3% more money to maintain price stability, right? You want the figure? 3% of 14.1 trillion is $423 billion in new money would be created under that formula. Total new money, okay? Now let's turn that into a per capita money creation figure. We've got a population of 310 million, so 423 billion divided by 310 million is $1,365 per person. New money created in the year, okay?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I suppose you could just give that money straight to the people and then tax it back to pay for the government's activities, but that's not how the Act envisions it. That would be a social credit kind of a concept in that case. The Act envisions how the money would be spent in several areas for the federal government, but as we noted earlier, it requires that the federal government give a grant of 25% of the total to the states. So if you've got a grant per person total of $1,300, then that means it's $341 per capita would be going to the states in their grant. In a state like Vermont, which is exactly one congressional district, so it's kind of interesting how the math works, we've got 650,000 people in Vermont. $341 per person would be a grant of $222 million in 1 year to the state of Vermont. Now, Vermont has a total budget of about $2.7 billion, correct?
Yep.
And we're looking at a shortfall of $150 million this year, and they don't know where they're going to get it. The state would be getting a grant for $222 million, would more than cover the shortfall that we're looking at.
Yeah.
Money creation.
Yeah. You know, this concept of how the federal government is going to share its monetary power with the state people, I think it's really worth, considering the political background, if you will, of the establishment of the monetary power of the government, okay? And let's go back, in time when it was the colonies, okay? The colonies had their independent currency money creation powers. Each of the colonies had their own independent. There was no United States, there was no Articles of Confederation or any of that stuff. So they had their own money creation powers. And then it was when, England passed its dastardly act that said that the colonies could no longer use their currencies for certain transactions that was going to basically put England in control of the economy of the colonies, that the colonies rose up and had fought a war of independence from the British monetary system, Pete. That's what the War of Independence was from. It was the colonial currencies. They had their own, each of them had their own currencies, and they were, they were tied to other things, but it was whatever they wanted, okay? And they were issued in quantities that were, sufficient to prosper without inflation. So, they were potentially going to lose that off to the British, Pete. So when they won the War of Independence, and we had to worry about having a national economy and a national government, and the powers that were going to stay with the states and so what was going to go to the national government, the money creation power was really like the most hardly fought of the powers, Pete, okay? And in so doing, the states gave up the right to create money. That power went to the federal government. Well, the federal government has let the private bankers take over that power, okay? Pete, we get down to the situation right now where the private creation of money is what is behind, is what's the cause of all of the failure of the national economy, the financial crisis, the economic crisis is a monetary crisis, Pete. It's a monetary crisis caused by that privatization. So Dennis Kucinich's bill merely restores to the government the right to create the money that was won by the colonies in the War of Independence, Pete. Okay? Just trying to keep this back to the political reality from which it came. So how then is the federal government now going to share, okay, its right to create money with the states, okay, or back to the colonies, but now with the states? And that's basically what Congressman Kucinich proposes to do. The federal government over the last 200 years has taken on a great deal of authority and provided many unfunded mandates down to the states, Pete, that the states have to tax their citizens for and then balance their budget, So that's why the people down there in Montpelier are sitting around the State House trying to figure out, what are we going to do about that 150 million? Who's going to get hurt the most? Pete, the people that are going to get hurt the most, people that can least afford to get hurt. And that's going on throughout the country.
Yeah, we're not in the worst shape.
I was in New Jersey. They just learned to lay off like hundreds of police in a place that has a terrible, crime situation. Pete, that's what's going to happen when the economy continues to contract. And that's why Dennis Kucinich has all of that in the preamble to the bill. So now we have the situation. There's the background. Bring it to the present. There's the reality. The states are trying to fight, for their lives in the face of these tremendous deficits that are coming about because they don't have tax revenues, because the economy's down, through no fault of the states themselves. So this provision of sharing the monetary power with the states is the most, was really one of the most defining parts of the act, one of the most essential parts of the act, and one of the parts that's going to really change the way things function in the future.
Joe, do you think this would change the relationship between the state and the local governments within the state?
Oh, yeah, definitely would. It definitely would, Pete. And whereas this is really kind of a circle of empowerment, Pete, if you will, from the people to the government, and then back to the people, because it's going back to the state. And then what's the state going to do? The state, you take a look at the state budget, how much of it is related to what's going on in the municipalities and the towns, let's call them, Pete. Okay, local government. Yeah, because when the state runs out of money, what does it do? It cuts its allocation to the towns for their schools.
Certainly schools. That's our biggest.
And what happens, Pete? What happens? Education suffers. When education suffers, really, everything suffers. The economy suffers. And the other thing, Pete, roads and bridges. Look at how many bridges the towns have to rebuild on an ongoing basis. It's on them, but they have to bond for it, So this is a great re-empowering, Pete. I see it as to the local people, to the local government, up then to the state, and up then to the federal government. It's going to create a whole bunch of new relationships that I think will be extremely good for democracy.
Good. Well, I'm sure that's going to generate some discussion down below, Joe, and we'll pick it up from there next week.